Welcome back to the Glass Alibi.
Glad to be back. We're getting into something really heavy today.
We are. We're doing a deep dive into the Camm family murders.
Yeah, this one takes us to Georgetown, Indiana.
Right, September 28th, 2000. And for anyone listening who isn't familiar with the details, I need to warn you, this is a story about a truly horrific crime.
It is, but it's also a masterclass in how a rush to judgment happens.
Exactly. It's the ultimate collision between really bad subjective science and the actual truth.
It's terrifying, honestly, because you realize how quickly a narrative can just swallow the facts whole.
So let's lay out the timeline for that night. David Camm, he's a recently retired Indiana State Trooper, and he's out for the evening.
He's at a local church playing in a recreational basketball game.
Right. And he finishes up, heads home to his house on Lockhart Road, and he pulls into the driveway at approximately 9:20 p.m.
And that time is crucial. We're going to come back to that 9.20 timestamp a lot.
Keep it in mind, definitely, because what David walks into when he opens that garage door it's a waking nightmare.
It's beyond comprehension. He finds his wife, Kim. She's 35 years old, and she is lying dead on the concrete floor of the garage. She's been shot.
And it gets worse because parked right there in the garage is the family's Ford Bronco.
Yeah.
And inside the vehicle are his two young kids. Brad is 7 and Jill is only 5.
Both of them had been shot as well.
It's just devastating. But David's reaction is, well, he acts like the state trooper he used to be. He immediately goes into emergency mode.
Right, he doesn't freeze. He reaches into the Bronco, pulls his son Brad out onto the cold garage floor, and starts performing CPR.
He's frantically trying to save his boy. When he realizes he can't, he makes this incredibly desperate 911 call.
And this is where the investigation starts. But the strange thing is, the way the police handled the scene almost instantly shifted away from standard protocol.
Yeah, usually you'd secure the area, look for an intruder, check for signs of a break-in.
Exactly. But they didn't really do that. Instead of looking outward for a threat, they looked right at the grieving father.
Which, okay, statistics tell us it's often the spouse. But the speed at which they locked onto David was startling.
It's a textbook case of tunnel vision. Investigators get to a scene, they see the husband, they form a theory right then and there, and suddenly every piece of evidence they look at is filtered through that assumption.
And they just discard anything that doesn't fit. Which brings us back to that timeline.
The alibi.
The rock-solid alibi. David was at the church. There was a sign-in sheet. People saw him playing basketball.
He was surrounded by witnesses. The window of time between him leaving the church and arriving at 9:20 p.m. makes it virtually impossible for him to have driven home, committed this horrific triple homicide, and staged the scene.
But the police just ignore the sign-in sheet.
They brush right past it. Because they started digging into his personal life, and they found something they liked better than the timeline.
The extramarital affairs?
Right. They discovered David had been unfaithful to Kim. So boom, there's your motive. They decide he wanted to escape his family responsibilities.
They build this rigid narrative around him, the bad husband who wanted a fresh start. And once they had that story, they narrowed their focus entirely on him.
And to make that story stick, they needed physical evidence. Which brings us to the gray t-shirt David was wearing that night.
This shirt becomes the absolute focal point of the prosecution. Investigators found blood on it.
But we need to be specific here. They didn't find him covered in blood. They found 8 tiny droplets on the lower part of the shirt.
8 tiny dots.
Just 8. Now, the prosecution brings in a blood spatter analyst, and this expert looks at those 8 little dots and declares it to be high-velocity impact spatter.
Meaning the blood sprayed onto him directly from the gunshot.
Exactly. If that's true, it places David standing right next to the victims when the gun was fired. It's the smoking gun.
But the defense brings in their own interpretation, which frankly aligns perfectly with what David said he was doing.
Right. He said he pulled his son out of the Bronco to do CPR.
And to do that, he had to reach across his 5-year-old daughter, Jill, who had been shot in the head.
The defense argued those 8 dots were transfer stains. As he reached into the tight space of the car, his shirt simply brushed against Jill's bloody hair.
It's terrifying when you think about it. The exact same 8 dots of blood. One expert says it proves he's a cold-blooded killer. The other says it proves he was a desperate father trying to save his son.
It really highlights the danger of subjective forensic science. If an analyst goes in knowing the police think the husband did it, they're psychologically primed to interpret ambiguous evidence as proof of guilt.
So with this highly disputed blood spatter and the theory about his affairs, They go to trial. This is trial 1 in 2002.
And the state's case has a massive hole in it. They have absolutely no physical link between David Camm and the murder weapon. No gun, no gunshot residue, nothing.
So what's their strategy? If you don't have the weapon, how do you get a conviction?
Character assassination. Pure and simple. They put his morality on trial instead of the facts of the murder.
They paraded his mistresses into the courtroom.
13 of them. 13 women testified against him about his infidelity.
I mean, that is entirely designed to prejudice the jury. You sit there and listen to 13 people talk about how this guy's a liar and a cheater, and pretty soon you start thinking, well, maybe he's a murderer too.
That was exactly the prosecution's goal. They used moral judgment to bridge the gap where they lacked hard evidence, and it worked.
It did. The jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 195 years in prison.
A lifetime sentence for a crime he said he didn't commit, while the real killer was completely ignored.
But the defense didn't give up. We fast forward to 2004, and the Indiana Court of Appeals steps in.
Right. They look at that first trial, and they overturn the conviction. They ruled that bringing in 13 women to testify about his affairs was improper character evidence.
It unfairly prejudiced the jury.
Exactly. You can't convict a man of murder just because he was a terrible husband.
So the case is reset. Trial 2 happens in 2006. But now the prosecution has a problem. They can't lean on the affairs to prove he wanted to escape his family.
So they pivot. And this is where the story gets incredibly dark. Since they couldn't use the escape motive, they invented a completely new one.
The molestation theory.
Yes. They actually stood up in court and alleged that David Camm had been molesting his 5-year-old daughter, Jill, and that he killed his entire family to cover it up.
And we really need to emphasize this for the listeners, that there was absolutely zero evidence for this.
None. The Indiana Supreme Court would later state on the record that there was, quote, zero competent evidence to support this claim.
It was entirely fabricated to give the jury a reason to hate him.
And again, they completely ignored his alibi at the church. They just threw this monstrous accusation at him.
And unbelievably, the jury bought it. He was found guilty a second time.
The mental toll that must have taken on him is unfathomable.
I can't even imagine. By the time this second conviction gets overturned in 2009, because the higher courts eventually realized the molestation theory was baseless garbage, 9 years have passed.
9 years of his life. Gone. Rotting in a cell, grieving his family, while being labeled a monster by the state.
But during this whole time, there was a piece of evidence sitting right there in the files.
The overlooked evidence.
Yes. Let's talk about the gray sweatshirt.
When investigators first processed the crime scene back in 2000, they found a gray sweatshirt on the garage floor, right near the bodies.
And it didn't belong to David. It didn't belong to Kim.
No. But because it didn't fit the state's tunnel vision theory that David was the sole killer, the investigators literally just ignored it for years.
It's baffling. But finally, the defense team demands new, advanced DNA testing on this sweatshirt.
And the results come back as a definite match, but not to David Camm.
The DNA belongs to a man named Charles Boney.
Right, and Charles Boney is not just some random guy. He is a convicted felon with a very long documented history of violence.
And he has a specific nickname, which I found so chilling when reading through the sources for this deep dive.
Yeah, he was known as the Shoe Bandit.
The Shoe Bandit. Because he had this bizarre, well-documented fixation on stealing women's shoes.
He had a foot fetish, and he would attack women to take their shoes. Now, think back to the crime scene in the garage.
Kim's shoes had been removed?
Exactly. They were taken off her feet and placed on top of the vehicle. It was a signature move.
So this fundamentally shatters the prosecution's entire narrative. You have David Camm on one hand, a former trooper, a husband, a father, with a rock-solid alibi placing them at a church basketball game.
And, on the other hand, suspect B. Charles Boney. A career criminal, a history of violence, a shoe fetish that matches the crime scene staging, and his literal DNA is on a sweatshirt found next to the victims.
Not to mention Boney's handprint was found on the Bronco.
Oh, and Boney was also proven to be in possession of the murder weapon.
It's overwhelming. Any rational person would look at this and say, okay, the police made a terrible mistake. Let's release David and arrest Boney.
But the state couldn't admit they were wrong. They had spent over a decade prosecuting David Camm. Admitting a mistake would mean massive liability and public humiliation.
So they invent yet another theory, the super predator theory.
Right. They decide that David Camm and Charles Boney must have been co-conspirators. They argued that David hired Boney to help him kill his family.
But what was the connection between them? Did they know each other? Did they call each other?
There was absolutely no connection. Zero. The state presented a theory that these two men worked together, despite having no evidence that they had ever met, spoken, or even crossed paths before the murders.
It's just absurd, but that sets the stage for trial number 3.
This was in 2013, and they moved it to Boone County to try and get an untainted jury.
And this trial really came down to a battle between speculative fiction and hard science.
The defense was incredible here. They didn't just defend David, they actively dismantled the bad science the state had relied on.
They took apart that blood spatter testimony, showing how flawed and biased it was.
And they put all the facts plainly in front of the jury. David was at the church until 9:20. The timeline makes it virtually impossible for him to be the killer. Meanwhile, Boney has DNA at the scene, a handprint on the car, and the murder weapon.
The jury had a very clear choice. Believe a co-conspirator theory with zero proof of a relationship, or believe the DNA and the alibi.
They deliberated for 10 hours.
10 hours. That must have been the longest 10 hours of David Camm's life.
But on October 24th, 2013, the verdict was finally read.
Not guilty.
He was exonerated on all charges. After 13 long years of imprisonment, he was finally a free man.
But you don't just walk away from 13 years of false imprisonment and say, oh, well, mistakes happen.
No, you don't. David Camm filed a civil lawsuit for malicious prosecution.
And this lawsuit is actually a massive deal for the legal world because of a ruling that came out in 2019.
Yes. A federal court made a landmark decision in his case. Historically, forensic witnesses have had absolute immunity, meaning you couldn't sue them even if their testimony was wrong.
But this ruling stripped that absolute immunity away from them.
It allowed his claims against those forensic experts to proceed. It basically said, you cannot use junk science to frame a man and then hide behind immunity. It brought real accountability to the system.
And he did win a settlement. He got $450,000 from the county and a multi-million-dollar payout from the state of Indiana.
But as he made very clear, he didn't just sue for the money. He sued for the 13 years of his life that they stole from him.
You can't put a price tag on missing your children grow up or being denied the chance to properly grieve your murdered family.
You really can't. And when you look at the whole picture, it is a terrifying example of investigative bias.
It shows how dangerous it is when the system prioritizes winning a conviction over actually finding the truth.
They relied on character assassination and shifting fabricated theories whenever the physical evidence didn't fit their narrative.
It leaves you with a really chilling thought, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, David Camm was a former state trooper. He understood the law. He had people fighting for him. But you have to wonder, as you're listening to this, how many other David Camms are sitting in a prison cell right now simply because a jury believed an expert who was just guessing?
It's a question that should keep all of us awake at night.
Thank you for listening to The Glass Alibi.